Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to talk about changing the way you paint. So I've been painting miniatures for over 40 years and my skill level has developed and changed over time. I'd say I'm a solid tabletop painter who can produce miniatures that look good in the context of a game, but I'm a long way from competition quality and I'm completely okay with that. I enjoy painting for the gaming table rather than aiming for the showcase, and I'm satisfied with that, with my particular approach. In fact, I even entered a painting competition once many years ago just to see how it felt and to test the water, so to speak. I knew going in that my work wouldn't stand out in a contest setting, but I still wanted to give it a try to confirm what I already suspected, that I'm a player painter rather than a competition painter. And that experience did indeed solidify my preference for painting to play, not to compete. So even though I'm not shooting for gold medals, I take pride in my in trying to improve my painting style. And over the last 40 years, I've pushed myself to learn new techniques, keep my painting fresh and enjoyable for me. And this brings me to today's topic. When it comes to miniature painting, are you someone who has a set style that hasn't changed much over the years, or do you embrace new techniques and adopt what works best for you? So when I first started painting miniatures for Dungeons and Dragons games in the early 1980s, my skill level was, frankly, non-existent. I had no access to painting guides or tutorials, and I didn't know any other painters who could teach me. I simply picked up some models and used a small set of enamel paints that I had laying around. The results were, as I'm sure you can imagine, pretty terrible, but I was really proud of the work nonetheless. I was immediately hooked on the hobby, knowing that this would only be the beginning. Now around that time I started buying magazines like Dragon and White Dwarf, which regularly featured painting guides and tips in them. And looking back, if I never attempted to learn anything beyond what those early guides taught me, I probably wouldn't have started my blog 15 years ago, or indeed even this channel. So while my content covers a lot more than just painting, I still love sharing pictures of my miniatures and armies, and I doubt many viewers would be impressed if I was still using enamel paints and a large brush with little detail or shading. Now, one of the first major changes I made was switching from enamel paints to acrylics. At first I used acrylics, the paints from Games Workshop for instance, but eventually I ended up switching my entire collection over to Vallejo, which is primarily the paint range that I use to this day. I just really like them. I know that I have used other paints. This is just my preference. So no disrespect to anyone who has a different range. This is my choice. Now the difference in quality and ease of use compared to what I was using before was transformative. With acrylics, I started learning the basics of painting properly. The things that really help to bring my models to life, like undercoating, shading and dry brushing and so on. And I distinctly remember painting a halfling archer after learning these basic techniques and was absolutely blown away by what I'd managed to achieve in the improvement. Now I still think I have that model somewhere in one of my collections somewhere. It might look pretty basic by today's standards, but it was a massive leap forward for me from what I'd been doing originally. Now over the years I've experienced with numerous techniques, not all of which have been successful. Some attempts were minor disasters, while others yielded moderate successes, and a few were significant breakthroughs. There are techniques I've kept and integrated into my own painting style, while others didn't suit me and were discarded. But the important thing is that I tried them, and I didn't just settle into one way of painting and refuse to learn anything new. I made an active effort to improve my skills every year, keeping my mind open to new ideas. And I think that's why my painting style has evolved a bit, so much over this time, even though I'll never be a competition level painter. Now, in addition to the basics, I've incorporated techniques like feathering and shading into my process, which has helped me to create higher quality finishes on my miniatures. Now, I also experimented with different inks and shades which can add depth and texture to a model. One technique I've never quite mastered was glazing. I've tried it a few times, but I never seem to work out how I need to use it, and can't get it to work the way that other people talk about it. But that's no big deal to me. And I haven't ventured into airbrushing, although that's more because of limited space than reluctance to try. I think if I had the room to set up an airbrushing station, I'd enjoy experimenting with it to see how it could enhance my painting style. But maybe one day when I get a bigger room. Now, at the end of the day, I'm still a wargamer who paints rather than a painter who wargames. I focus on the 3-foot rule, meaning I want my models to look good when viewed from the typical gaming distance of around 3 feet. I don't stress too much about making every detail flawless. Instead, I aim for models that look great on the table and during a game, because to me, painting is ultimately about enhancing the gaming experience rather than achieving perfection. Still, the time and care I put into each model reflects my desire to do a good job, even if my work will never be competition ready. So to all of you out there reading or watching, I'd love to know, have you developed your own painting style over the years and stuck to it? Or do you enjoy experimenting with new techniques and products as I have? Are you someone who strives for perfection, perhaps aiming to enter competitions and display work in showcases? Or are you more like me, content with a good, solid, standard tabletop technique that brings your games to life? I'd love to hear about your painting journey, your goals, and the techniques that have shaped your style in the comments below. It's always inspiring to hear other hobbyists' stories, and I look forward to reading about your particular experiences. So we're going to have a rather long hobby update this week. Last weekend I brought Test of Resolve and my Wars of the Roses collection back to the shed of war for an alternative what-if version of Bosworth. So I postulated what would have happened if King Richard III's spies network had been slightly better informed about the intentions of the Stanleys and the route of Henry Tudor's march towards the Midlands. Richard was many things, but he was not an inexperienced or timid commander, having fought campaigns on behalf of his brother, Edward IV. So would Richard have seen an opportunity to stop the Stanleys from formalising their support for Henry by catching the much smaller Lancastrian army a few days earlier than had happened historically? So in this game, Richard III's army left Leicester as soon as news of Henry's advance had been confirmed. The king camped briefly at Ambion Hill and considered his options. The ridge of high ground around Ambion Hill through to Stoke Golding crosses Henry's route, and it was a good defensive position, but the flat lowlands were probably not ideal to fight a battle on. Richard also knows that the Stanley's army is shadowing Henry's, and despite the king's demands for loyalty, he cannot be entirely certain of their allegiance. So in my scenario, he decides to attack Henry before he can join forces with the Stanleys. So if his army presses on now, they could resupply at Atherstone and catch Henry at Lichfield in 2 days' time. Now meanwhile, Henry has been conversing with the Stanleys and plans to meet at Lichfield to formalise their agreement. The Stanleys' army is about a day's march to the northeast, but William and Thomas Stanley and their household troops have diverted to the town to meet Henry Tudor. This is when news of the advancing Yorkist army is received. Henry's army is seriously outnumbered, and Sir William Stanley is forced to decide to stay and defend his son-in-law. He sends a rider to bring the rest of his army, knowing that they'll probably arrive too late to change the outcome. Henry's most experienced commander, Oxford, has just enough time to deploy the army on a ridge crossing the road to Lichfield, and orders his archers and crossbowmen to prepare hasty defences. So this is the position in which the game began, with Henry and his army on the hill, his much smaller army, 8,000 men compared to the 11,000 or so under Richard's control down on the lowlands. Now the game has a slow start, with a turn of cards being stubbornly unspectacular, but eventually the Yorkists begin to move towards the Lancastrians, standing stoically on their ridge. Surgit was commanding Northumberland, but unlike in the actual battle, when Northumberland's battle didn't support the king, this time his battle does advance, reassured it seems by their superior numbers. As I said, King Richard's army is about 11,000 strong and Henry's only about 8,000. But the Lancastrian army has many more experienced French troops within its ranks and has time to prepare some hasty defences for its archers. Now, it was Northumberland's array that seemed to do most of the fighting in this game, and with the careful application of force and a degree of luck, they were able to force their way up onto that ridge and wear down Oxford's battle. Slowly but surely during the course of the day of our gaming, they were able to reduce the resolve of that battle. Meanwhile, Richard, commanding Brackenbury's troops, our Richard that is, commanding Brackenbury's troops, carefully applied pressure from his archers and handgunners, while Steve moved King Richard's knights into position to charge the Tudor centre. Eventually, Oxford's command reached breaking point and withdrew, but Ray, commanding Henry's household knights, had one last chance to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. King Richard's knights had charged uphill, but had been forced to turn tail and expose their rear to a counter-charge. So Henry's knights swept downhill, sensing the chance for history in the balance. But in the end, they were unable to make good on their opportunity. It has to be said, with the help of some really poor dice rolling. With victory tantalisingly out of reach and half the army withdrawn, Ray decided to concede the game, handing a well-fought victory to the king. The other thing I've been doing this week is the big tidy up. Now, I spent a couple of evenings this week and a chunk of the weekend doing some much needed cleaning and decluttering in this operations room. Not very exciting, I'll grant you, but definitely necessary and very overdue. I did start this process months ago and then got sidetracked. There's a lot of art materials belonging to my daughter being stored in here, and much of it she doesn't need anymore. So with a bit of gentle negotiation, we've cleared out several drawers of my terrain storage area, giving me some much needed room for new buildings. And with the declutter process done, I moved on to cleaning, again, not very exciting, but completely necessary, my desk. My little corner room is prone to mould, and if I don't keep on top of it, the walls get very cold, and I spend a lot of time in here breathing out moist air, which then condenses on those cold walls and windows, creating the perfect environment for mould. Now, I'm not much of a horticulturalist, but at the best of times, but I certainly don't want an unhealthy mould collection in this room, which means a regular clean of the walls and windows. I did have a dehumidifier at one point, but it broke down, and I've yet got round to replacing it. So as I say, this is a much needed process I want to do. I don't want to get mould in this room that will be affecting the books and other soft materials. So it's a non-gaming but much needed clean-up that's been taking place. So once again, workbench update. Not a lot's been happening on the workbench, certainly not painting anyway. Because of the big clean up, I've extended the tidying up. I've been reorganising the contents of my desk and just clearing out some old and useless building materials, stuff that's either gone off or just half opened and so on. New plastic trays have been added, making it easier to move items I want up and clean up when after I've finished a painting session. I've also been having yet another stock check of scat material and other terrain, making consumables, because I'm going to warfare next weekend with the rejects, and I expect to come home with a load of goodies, and I'll need some space to store them correctly, hence the need to go through some of my drawers and clear out some clutter. So that's it for this week. Please join the conversation in the comments below, and of course if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share. And if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from this channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course keep rolling high.